Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sofia Campos, Political Education Coordinator con Mi Gente. Mi Gente is a national political home for Latinx, Chicanx people in the U.S. who are pro-Black, pro-queer, pro-woman, pro-earth, and share our pro-Pueblo values. We believe in organizing and building a base of gente who believe in a better world for our people and believe in doing the work to make that happen and building the relationships to make that possible. And today we are excited to be joining in conversation with Mariam from Palestine to learn more about the Palestinian struggle for liberation and to hear more about lessons that we can share and just understand more about what's been happening there and what's happening there currently. So I'm going to pass it over to Mariam to introduce herself and your experience with the struggle for Palestinian freedom.
Hi. First off, thank you for having me, and I'm very humbled to be here with you all and to be able to share our experiences as an echo. Again, I'm Mariam Barghouti. I'm Palestinian, based in Ramallah, and that's who I am, an individual that is acting as an echo. So I just also want to emphasize that this isn't about me, but it is about the entire struggle of Palestine for liberation. And I really appreciate you being able and just doing that, saying that it's our struggle for liberation.
Definitely. Thank you, Mariam, for joining us. It is a little bit later in Palestine, so I also appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us and share this knowledge with us. And for folks who don't know, I wanted to start off just really basic and invite you to share and to help us understand what life is like for Palestinians living under Israeli occupation.
Right. So this is a question that I get often. And it's one of the questions that I think we have the most difficulty answering, because military occupation means a system, a labyrinthine system that revolves around oppressing us. So for me, daily life means not being able to say things like, this is a struggle for liberation, not being able to say, I'm Palestinian, not being able to say, Israel is an apartheid state that is committing crimes against humanity, because this is also incitement charges. And that's what it's like living here, that a military imposed colonial occupation enters the most intimate spaces in your life. That I have a West Bank ID, people in Gaza have a Gaza ID that is orange, and the West Bank is green. And in Jerusalem is a blue ID. And then you have almost half of our population in exile, in diaspora, as refugees, as immigrants, as trying to live life because they can't here.
Yes. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about the complexity of what it means to live under Israeli occupation. I know there's a lot more. And I also want to say, as undocumented folks living in the US, I understand a little bit of that complexity and the many IDs and forms of identification, what you can and cannot say, depending on who you're in front of, where you are, the limitations on literally your ability to move, not just across borders, but from your house to another neighborhood. And I was able to visit Palestine in 2016. And as an undocumented person growing up in the US, being able to experience that on a whole other side of the world was deep, intense, but also very humbling. So I appreciate you uplifting that complexity. And I wanted to also invite you to share a little bit of the context of how we got here. Any latest updates that you want to share? What moment are we in now in relationship to the struggle for Palestinian liberation?
Right. So one of the primary issues about how the developments are being covered, how the context is being covered, is that what's happening is new, or it's just an escalation in the past couple of years. What is happening is we are reaching a pivotal moment in the Israeli colonial project, which began in 1948 officially. Of course, it preceded that. And more than 60% of the West Bank is Israeli settlers and settlements. Palestinians with Israeli citizenship have been facing these discriminatory policies in their own lands because the rest of the population was dispossessed in 1948 and 1967. And then you have Gaza, that's been under a military-imposed siege for 15 years by Israel, and it gets bombed more often than is covered in the media. The only time it's covered in the media is when Palestinians are firing rockets back, or when Palestinians are protesting their right to exit this open-air prison without being shot at, without being killed. And we are at a pivotal moment. I keep telling anyone really that's listening, we're at a final breath. We're at a point where we do end up either getting ethnically cleansed or we can fight back. And that requires the world to stand with us. That means no more censoring us online by American-based tech companies. That means holding Israel accountable instead of criminalizing the right to boycott, which is a nonviolent movement. I'd like to point that out because of the argument that Israel often uses. Oh, you know, Palestinians are being violent or Palestinians are armed. No, the reason the violence we experience is because we're Palestinian. Right now, in 1948, which is what we call the area where Palestinians with Israeli citizenship are, Palestine 48 is also the area that is considered Israel proper. But for us, these are our homes that we still can't go to. And those that remained and protested in May and in April were targeted by the Israeli police as an attempt to settle the score with Palestinians that said, you know what? Yeah, we're done being called Israeli Arabs because we're Palestinian. That's right. And that's what Israel did. It erased the identity. And that's what we mean ethnic cleansing. That Palestinians are not just me in the West Bank. They're not just Gaza or the refugees that are scattered along the globe. It is also the Palestinians with Israeli citizenship that are being called Israeli Arabs. And right now, Palestinians are calling for unity, while Israel continues to call for fragmentation. And I think this is the scary part, but this is the moment where we say we're at a final breath and we need all the support.
Wow, thank you. So many parallels. Divide and conquer, right? Consistently used to divide our people and keep us down. Something I was reading about, I was just looking up different statistics, and something I read is that 1 million Palestinians have been arrested since 1967. So in the last 50 years, from a population of about 5 million people, right? There's 5 million Palestinians living in Palestine proper. And that includes 50,000 children and 17,000 women and girls who have been detained under administrative detention. And that's, again, something that we as immigrants know very well here in this country, how policies can be used to not just criminalize people, but keep people in detention, incarcerated without any charges, without any trial, and use that as a tool to just keep people out or keep people silenced. And so knowing that mass incarceration and detention policies are used in both Israel and the US, knowing that also tear gas and border walls, the same materials physically, right, are used in the US and in Palestine. I'm curious, what lessons do you feel are most important to share with us here?
So yes, in terms of the arrests since 1967, Israel arrested and detained 70% of the male population alone since 1967. And this is discounting the most recent escalations and detainment. In Palestine, what we see military detention as, what we see the imprisonment of Palestinians is political detainment. And more than this is that it is used as a mechanism to silence Palestinians, to keep them in isolation, but also to break our spirits. When Israel isn't bombing Gaza, when it isn't shooting down Palestinians at a protest, it's arresting them for social media posts. And it is playing judge, it is playing prosecutor, it is playing defendant in a courtroom that controls our lives. And I had a short experience in Israeli detention in 2014. And it was just a week that I was detained over false allegations by an Israeli soldier who, I quote, at the time of detention, looked at myself and a friend of mine detained with me and said, "I'm going to mess up your life." Very arrogantly understood the power that he had over our lives. And this is what the detainment of Palestinians has become. It's systemic, it is abusive, and it focuses on breaking our spirits in silence, without the witnesses, without the cameras. And I think this is also a parallel to the US that continues to illustrate it's these liberties, these freedoms, the land of the free, home of the brave, but one does not admit to its own colonial past. It is a colonial state, and we need to start bringing that, I think, more into the conversation. And it won't expose its current day abuses of putting children in cages, of its mass deportation rates over, again, you can frame things in a certain way, but in the end, they're underpinned by this racial supremacy and an attempt to keep the status quo. Which is why right now in Palestine, when they tell us about the violence and the escalation, they say, well, don't you want a de-escalation? Don't you want things to go back to where they were? No, we don't. We really do not. What we're trying to do is move forward. And yes, that's scary. And yes, that means there are going to be criminals who are tried. But that was the only way we moved forward in history. That was the only way for me as a woman. I know it was the pains of those who struggled in the past that allowed me to be where I am today. And so we're embracing change presently. While everyone's telling us go back, we're saying, no, we need to go forward because we're going to get killed either way. And we want to live. People forget that. You pursue sometimes a lot of hardship because you're pursuing a way of life that keeps you dignified.
That's right. Thank you. Speaking about women and speaking about not just the attempt to break our spirits, but the resistance to that and the healing and liberation that we find in the midst of that. I'm curious what the role of women and youth have been in this movement, in this moment.
So women have often been at the forefront of the Palestinian struggle. The fact that they had visibility or not is what's shifting. As women, we are getting a lot more visibility. We are enforcing also our voices and our own strengths to not be weaponized, to not be tokenized or used, but as equal partners with also our own demands in this. And I think that's been a big part of the role that youth and women have been playing. It is this amplifying of our right to live, but to also be visible. That again, we're not little, puppeteers and puppets to be moved. We are intelligent, and we know what we need to live, and we are saying it very clearly. Youth constitute the majority of the Palestinian population. Almost 70% are youth. Most of them are under the age of 15. This is an age group that has hopes, that has dreams, that has also new visions and innovative ways of doing, whether it's governance, of art, of struggle. And I think we've seen a shift in the Palestinian reality where I personally thought we were so disempowered that there was no way forward. But youth have managed to come together, women have managed to come together, and men have managed to come together as well by acknowledging the different positions we carry in our different roles, and empowered each other. That at this moment, colonialism and patriarchy are seen together. They're not separate. We don't just choose to fight this or that. The right to live is not just Palestinians saying free the children detainees, stop killing children. We're saying stop killing us all, stop detaining us all. And I think that's been the coming together in its concrete manifestation here.
Yes. One comment I want to make, because I forgot to do it in the beginning, but if you are looking for Spanish interpretation, please go to the Mi Gente Support Committee page. So that's just facebook.com/Mi Gente Comité, and I'll say it in Spanish. Si buscas interpretación en español, por favor visita facebook.com/Mi Gente Comité. And I also wanted to comment on yes, not just focusing on one part of our population. The same exact framing was happening under the Trump administration, right? And we had to push back and say, free them all, free us all, because we're not just fighting for any one part of. Children are part of our family units, right? If the parents are deported, incarcerated, detained, the children will suffer because of that. Our generations to come will suffer because of that. And so we need to protect one another and organize to do that. So I really appreciate you uplifting that as well. And I'm curious, how y'all have been finding healing and joy, a different kind of movement amidst so much resistance and militarization and colonialism. Where have you been finding that? Because I know you have. I experienced it when I was there.
So we find it with each other, and by taking care of each other. Truly, I mean, yesterday, my birthday, I wanted to celebrate with friends and family.
Yes.
Thank you. And so it's the little things where I wanted to celebrate today, and then we woke up to the call that Nizar Banat was assassinated earlier this morning by the Palestinian security forces in Hebron. And so in a protest in Ramallah right now, police threw tear gas and stun grenades at the protesters. And initially that, I am...
Can you say a little bit about who he is?
Yes. So Nizar is a Palestinian from Hebron, and he is a critical individual, very outspoken about the discrimination, the oppression, and the violence of the Palestinian authorities. And last night, in an attempt to arrest him, he was attacked and beaten and killed. And this is a deliberate targeting. This is an assassination. It reminds me of when Ahmed Fahd Jamil from Al-Amari refugee camp in Ramallah was also killed by Israeli special ops under the pretext of trying to arrest someone. He was an accident kill, quote unquote. So it's showing you how the violence is so prevalent, that Nizar, who is known by many people on the ground, was assassinated, and how terrifying to see these developments, how truly none of us are safe, especially youth, who are really leading a lot of the movements here, who are very much unapologetic about themselves and their right to live. And that's what, amid the violence, helps us. I don't think we're healing, but it helps us hold on until we are able to heal. You can't heal until it stops. You can't heal until you are home and you feel safe in that home.
That's right.
But we're finding strength. And that is with each other. Truly, when you see strangers in the street that you've never met, probably might not see again, and take care of them like they are you, is something that it's so empowering. And it does forge bonds beyond the family and the friend and the inner circle that tends to happen, especially with organizing. It makes you go beyond, humbles you a bit. But I think we're finding healing in being humbled.
Shukran. Yeah. I will also say Palestinian food is amazing. So I also want to the joy
food.
Our foods.
Yes.
Yeah, so grateful for also the way that the earth holds us. As much as we may not be safe in these colonized territories, we know that the earth strives to be free. We know that nature strives to help us heal. And so there is healing in the food, in the land, as we strive to protect it and ourselves. So I'm curious, what's needed now? What's up next?
Yeah. It's a lot. what's coming ahead is, I think, a lot more violence and clandestine violence. Remember, the pains and the abuses that happen aren't always visible and they aren't always bloody, but they are meant to strike where it hurts, and it is meant to keep building with the apartheid wall here in its visible, tangible form, or it's the systems of, even not letting allies show their support to Palestinians through policy. Where do we go from here? Is a big question. How can others help is even bigger, because we're in Palestine, we're still figuring out what we're doing and what we can do. We know our goal, and that is freedom, and that is and living in dignity. We know we need the support of the international community. That means if you see our voices being silenced, do not let that pass by. That means download our testimonies, our videos, our images, because we do want to hold the criminals accountable, and this is our evidence database. So we need help preserving it and keeping it safe as well. And more than this, help the way you can. If you are a doctor, please share with us the tips. If you are a lawyer, point out the loopholes in international law, and work within your circles. Have the difficult conversations that challenge your friends and family who may still adopt a very colonial narrative on Palestine. And tell us how we can help as well, because this isn't a one-way street where Palestinians are just receiving solidarity. We are trying to extend it. We can offer our knowledge from the weapons and how to deal with them, with tear gas, bombing from Gaza, military detention. Maybe that's how we can help, but also tell us how we can. Because I think our exchanges in knowledge has been our strong suit this time. What we learned from the movements in the US against white supremacy has been our strong suit this time as well. So to keep this back and forth, but also I want to hear from you, Sophia. What are the opportunities you see around?
Yeah, I was actually gonna ask as well, like, what changes have you seen in international solidarity? Because even in the little time that I've gotten to know the struggle for Palestinian liberation and was able to visit Palestine in 2016, it's changed so much. And there are some things that have stayed the same, such as the way that Zionist narrative responds, right? And tries to complicate things more than they really are, more than one people oppressing another and incarcerating another and keeping another down. So I'm curious how you've seen that shift. And then I would love to, also answer your question.
Yeah. So there is a shift, and we have been so afraid to admit it, I think, because it is a positive shift for us, that we were too afraid to, is there really a shift happening internationally? We kept asking each other that. And it's that people are more vocal, not just for the rights of Palestinians themselves, censored, denied access to nation, to have the power control not just domestic policy, foreign policy, and how those are linked together. I've seen more voices. I remember just it's lost the spectrum, teachers to journalists to organizers, bravery to call out Israel a colonial state, which in of itself is accomplishment, because Israel has been through the Zionist movement to illustrate it as the only democracy in the Middle East, to illustrate itself as a club that you want to visit, to illustrate itself as the global jury, that anything you say against Israeli apartheid be equated with anti-Semitism. I see people over and recognize manipulation of Jewish for Israeli effort and goals. So this has been the shift I'm witnessing. It's to find to Palestinians. More than that, a courage to speak out, even though it's backlash. You know, professors that lost their jobs, but people are coming, you know, oppression. Yeah. Where can I pick up?
The last couple of sentences. I think we got most of it.
Okay. So, also lack of proper internet is part of Israeli policy. But it's exactly like this, you know, there is a shift where we're even talking about digital rights for Palestinians and being censored on social media and silenced on the ground. So this is a reflection of people not being selective in terms of calling out oppressors, right? And not being afraid of the power any regime illustrates to the globe as an untouchable, because whether they weaponize arguments like Jewish pains to throw that you are anti-Semitic if you're anti-apartheid, or to see it as it is. I think the shift is people, again, like you mentioned, simplifying. No, we don't have to complicate this. What's complicated is the way they enforce it, but what they're enforcing is the same. Colonial ethnic cleansing.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think answers
completely. Yes. I also wanted to uplift folks like Ahmed, who actually put us in touch, people organizing delegations and making sure that people are exchanging in a real way, not just learning about organizing lessons, which is very important, but also connecting through joy, through resistance, through shared struggle, but also shared joy and freedoms. And I know that has brought many of us, particularly Black and brown folks, closer, particularly folks who were never able to travel abroad, who never even knew, right, what lands across the world looked like or felt like, bringing us closer to that intimacy and to understanding that we are one human people, and we all deserve the liberation that we are seeking, that Palestinians are seeking. And before we open it up to a few questions from the audience, I wanted to answer your question. I think not being afraid to speak up when any kind of oppression is around you is very, very important. Not having that fear. And then, like what you said, knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your offerings are, and seeing how they can help those around you and those that you are in relationship with. There are so many similarities between the Palestinian struggle and our struggles here in the US. Particularly, you know, as an immigrant, as a Latina, knowing how incarceration is affecting us, knowing how these tools of violence are impacting us, knowing that the US is learning a lot of its plans, a lot of its games, a lot of its instruments of oppression directly from Israel, and training its military with the Israeli military, right? Those are not just conceptual or theoretical. Those are real life things that have been happening for decades. And so we need to catch up to that, learn about that, investigate that, and share that with our loved ones, share that with our parents, our familias, who very much understand what that means, who have very much lived through dictatorships, through colonial projects, right? And so not being afraid to share what you know with your people, and then taking action alongside that. So those are just a few of the things that I try to practice, and that I hope more of our people will practice as well. Anything you want to add, Mariam?
That I really appreciate your usage of uplifting. Just that it's really resonating. I think that's also part of what's been happening. Part of the reason, you know, you and I are having this conversation is the different uplifting, the small upliftings that happen throughout our networks that eventually merge together as this web, where we can each be distinct in our struggles, but very much interlinked in that. So I appreciate that, and the emphasis, ecosystems that we're trying to preserve as us with it in the broader sense and also in the nature sense, because in the end, this is part of the Palestinian struggle. It's not lands by ownership. It is lands by this is what's going to let us be sustainable and live and grow our own foods and produce, for example, and how much is we're reliant on all of it. I appreciate you for just continuously emphasizing that.
No, definitely. The ecosystems is something we've been talking a lot about at Mi Gente also as we grow the organization and evolve. And so I'll say preserve and evolve our ecosystems because unfortunately they've been so heavily impacted, right, by the ways that all of these colonial powers have taken over. And so how do we, I think, resist as well as build something anew? So I appreciate you saying that we're not trying to go back to anything. That was not normal. Pre-COVID was also not normal. So how do we build a new way of being, of living? How do we embody that and build that together? Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I'm curious if there's any questions from the audience. We have just a few more minutes, y'all. If you have any curiosities, Mariam is a great resource. And I see one here. So there's a question around Jewish and Palestinian communities here in the US and the gap between them. I think there's a curiosity around what resonates with both communities across differences. Curious if you have any thoughts.
Wait, what do you mean the Jewish and Palestinian community in the US? Because that's, I mean, Palestinian, I get, but Jewish is much broader, right?
Maybe you can we also a little bit of overlap. Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yeah. Okay. And the question specifically was, what do both sides need to hear to bridge gaps? What do you think would resonate with both? Just to say that.
I really think it would be unfair for me to speak on behalf of like those communities from the little that I know there. But more than this, again, when you say Jewish and Palestinian community in the US, we need to speak what Palestinian community and which Jewish community as well. Because again, I also feel there's a big exclusion of Afro-Jewish communities in the US as well from the entire narrative. And it shows you how entrenched we are in the racialization that happened in the US. In terms of allies and advocating and bridging gaps, let's come together for justice. Let's just come together for speaking out against any oppression, no matter what shape or form. And that, I think, by itself will lead to bridging gaps, this recognition of oppression and refusal to tolerate it as well, without waiting. Like, we can't keep waiting to reject oppression until it gets to a certain ugly point. Start, pointing out the little things on the daily.
Definitely. When I was in Palestine, there definitely is way more, and Jewish and Palestine is not the right binary, and also uplifting just the way that binaries are a tool of divide and conquer, right? Again, pretending that there is one side versus another is just not the case, like 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time. So I'm curious if you can illustrate the complexity, the diversity, and the beauty of the peoples in Palestine a little bit for folks who are not familiar.
Right. So, Palestine can so easily be reduced to one place that's usually amplified in the media, whether it's Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem and suddenly every Palestinian is Sheikh Jarrah, or Gaza when it's being bombed, suddenly we're all quote unquote Hamas and terrorists. Or, it's Palestine. It really depends on that. But we are a very diverse group of Palestinians. And again, the divide and conquer separated us across geopolitical lines, where even my experience with Israeli colonialism is so different than a Palestinian in Haifa that our ability to relate is, the effort is doubled in terms of being able to share each other's experiences. And then comes the entire, well, this is an Arab versus Jew struggle, right? Forgetting completely that there is something that, you know, is missing here, and the fact that there are Mizrahin, who are Jews of Arab descent, that are also being erased from the narrative. And Palestinians are Palestinians, and they are fighting Israeli Zionist colonialism. And this is kind of something that's so basic and instinctive to me as a Palestinian, and to anyone I think that's more familiar with being here, than it might be for the international community that gets its news updates. But yeah, let's not falter into this is, you know, an Arab versus Jew conflict over religion. This is a colonial ethnic cleansing by a Zionist movement, and Palestinians are being erased by calling them Arabs.
Thank you for that. I think that's really important for folks outside of that region to know, particularly in the US, where, yeah, our words, our narratives that we amplify do very much matter. And I think the Zionist movement has been trying to make that binary, has been trying to propagate that. And so we need to just dismiss that and acknowledge what is actually happening. And if there's any other questions, y'all, let us know. But that was the one that I saw. I'm curious if you have any questions for us.
Oh, so many. But also that I know, just because there isn't, so it's also more difficult, I think, in Palestine for us to receive news updates about other parts in the world. So that impedes our ability to really gauge the situation, especially because Palestinians speak Arabic. They're not, you know, the people that are seen in the media who are fluent in English. So I want to know what's happening in terms of immigration policies now, especially with the changes that went on in the US, for example, and what's being done on that and what needs to be done. Again, kind of throwing the questions back, but it's what we need to know.
Yeah. I will say language is something that, yeah, I think we're all trying to also build ecosystems around. So having this conversation interpreted to Spanish, I'm really grateful for a political home like Mi Gente that is building that infrastructure, because it does require us to build our own tools, build our own networks of people who can offer. Right now, our interpreters are Mi Gente members, for example, doing this language justice work, because we know that our parents, our uncles, our families here and abroad in Latin America also want to know what's happening, but don't have that access to the English language. And so grateful for us being able to communicate across borders and have this language justice work to sustain it. And yes, there's a lot to share. One of the main campaigns that Mi Gente led last year was Fuera Trump. So knowing that the last 4 years of the Trump administration were not just oppressive, but were regressing a lot of the things that we had fought for, right? Like deferred action, which was a policy that immigrant undocumented youth fought for, which is what allowed me to visit Palestine in 2016. And then Trump came in and not just undid a bunch of stuff, but also added a lot of little changes that made things harder for immigrants, undocumented folks trying to naturalize in this country. And he also made it harder. He made it really clear that residency will not protect you. A green card will not protect you. Even your citizenship may not protect you. So that's another parallel that I'm hearing with what you're sharing, is we need to stay organized. We need to stay connected and ready, because these papers, these policies, right, are being used by those who wish us harm. And so Fuera Trump was a major campaign that we invested in, and thankfully we were able to get him out. It was not an ideal choice between candidates. We endorsed Bernie Sanders in the primaries last year, but we understood that Biden was the Biden administration is the choice that we wanted to go with over the last 4 years of Trump that we experienced. And so, like I mentioned, right now, we, as mi gente, I'll say, we are trying to figure out how we want to move differently in these next 5 years. What kinds of ecosystems do we want to invest in and build? What kind of new infrastructure is needed now that we've been building for 5 years? What kind of base building and organizing programs do we need to offer our gente, our people, our young people, so that we are able to offer them things and not just leave them to recreate or have to figure things out by themselves. So I'm sure there's a lot that we can exchange in those terms as well, that I'd love to just share more about what you've learned in terms of teaching and guiding young people. So that we can also, build more strongly, more effectively. Because we know that the struggle is not getting easier. 50% of the U.S. voted for Trump, right? So that doesn't just go away.
No.
That's what the landscape is looking like.
See, that's something I'm also noticing here is that, so there's been a change in Israeli government to Bennett, who's considered more right-wing. Although for us, colonialism is colonialism, whether it's subtle or blatant, it's the same. But it's not the person, it's the supporters, right? It's not Trump, it's this 50% that still sees nothing wrong with his policies. And that's why for us, I think now, especially as Palestinians, a lot of our energy is going towards, Mariam Sophia, the people.
Yes.
Not just the policymakers. Policymakers, leaders are representatives of the reality. So for us, it's like reaching out, learning now, for instance, about this is more important than just targeting, quote unquote, again, keeping power centralized within a select circle.
Yes, I'm curious, so something we're looking at in alongside that base building program is also electorates and running our own people. That's something we've been experimenting with, which is more exciting than choosing between two candidates that we don't prefer. I'm curious if that's been a conversation or what those possibilities may look like.
So this is also maybe something we can also learn from through your own experiences, because it is different for us. No matter what happens at the legislative level internally for Palestinians, the design of representatives still excludes Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. It still excludes Palestinians in diaspora. So what's happening now is more of trying to even just get a census of who Palestinians are scattered. It's again a unification before we can move on to electoral processes. Again, the Palestinian Authority assassinated a dissident this morning and isn't really allowing for any options for elections. And then finally is, no matter who here, takes on a shape of governance, as long as Israeli colonialism persists, that's where the power is going to stay concentrated. So that hinders us from it.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Is there anything else in terms of lessons on organizing, or just things that you want to make sure we continue to uplift as we move forward from this conversation and as we continue to grow more relationships and more connections from between our communities?
So in terms of organizing, linking up, truly sending us your own lessons, while also just making sure that the voices, we continue amplifying each other's voices is important. For us here on the ground, we are protecting each other. Israel has its army. We have each other in our communities. So you have lawyers volunteering their time. You have, farmers donating their own foods. You have medics giving in first aid lessons and training for free. So it's exchange, continue exchanging these tools that we really need for survival. From engaging with policymakers at an international level to how we can grow our home gardens to eat. Because this is what we need to stop relying on quote unquote public services and being the public service.
Yes. At Mi Gente, we use with, without, and against the state. And so out of necessity, y'all are having to figure out without the state and build your own services, as you're saying, right? Fulfill your own needs. And although like, it shouldn't have to be this way, it shouldn't be this way. And there is a lot of power and strength that you are building as you do that. So I also want to acknowledge that and the lessons that you are humbly and graciously sharing with us around the world, because you and the Palestinian people are inspiring us in so many ways, and inspiring our spirits to not be broken, but to be transformed, and to be stronger, to be what we need to be in order to build this new world that I think we all want, desire, and deserve. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a mutual, see, I've heard this, Palestinians are inspiring a lot of the world. And we just want to remind how much we've been inspired by all the different struggles. We're not here on our own. No, we're here because of the seeds that were planted in us. Despite the continuous repression of the different struggles that we saw, they figure out a weapon, you again figure out a way to live beyond it. And so it's weird for me to hear that, that Palestinians have inspired.
It's a collective, though. It's exactly what you're saying. It's a tejido. It's a whole fabric, right? We are many threads, one collective struggle for liberation. And so we inspire each other and we look gorgeous together.
Yes.
And so thank you for that reminder of zooming out and remembering to see each other and to see ourselves in it as well. That's just as important.
Yeah. Oof.
This is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Truly.
I look forward to staying in touch. This was more or less our time. So unless you have any other words you'd like to share with our gente, we can wrap up.
Just don't be afraid. Now you don't have to be fearless, but you don't have to be controlled by your fear. And right now we all really need to just overcome a lot together for our own struggles and for global justice, which is really what we're all, I think, advocating for. Don't be afraid. It's gonna be a long way. Take breath. In Arabic, we have a saying, nafas tawil, that any struggle needs continuous breathing. So we need to just keep going with that. And yeah, link up with Indians, link up with Bahrainis, link up with Guatemala, link up. Just that, if I can live with anything, it's that.
Yes, do not be afraid and link up. Sin miedo. Thank you so much. Sin miedo means without fear also. So I'm exchanging across languages here. I love it.
Nice. Sin miedo.
Yeah, we say sin papeles, sin miedo was a strong chant. Without papers, without fear.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I use that a lot in the marches.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again. We'll stay in touch. If folks have more questions, y'all, feel free to hit me up. Sofia@migente.net. We'll be continuing these conversations of international solidarity. Have been talking to our comrades in Colombia and Puerto Rico, now with Palestine. And we'll continue to grow our international solidarity because we know we are one. And we have so much to learn, to exchange, to share, and to grow. So thank you again, Mariam in Palestine. And thank you all for joining us. Have a beautiful day and night.